There are entire worlds sleeping beneath the ground, 20 lost cities, ancient places, still being uncovered by archaeologists, silent metropolises. They're only now starting to whisper their stories, and it shows human history not as a straight line, but as a web, a vast, interconnected web of ambition and memory. A city of temples vanished into a jungle. A secret lies inside a mountain of solid rock. Each discovery is a puzzle piece. It reshapes what we thought we knew about trade, about power, about why great societies fade. There's a forgotten chapter of our own story waiting to be found. The whispers from the earth, they reach us now because of a shift in how we listen. The treasure maps and the tall tales, they're gone. Now it's the quiet hum of technology, modern archaeology. It's a detective story, but it's written in laser light and radio waves. There's Lalibela, which can see right through a dense jungle canopy to show you the ghostly outlines of streets and plazas underneath. Or ground-penetrating radar, it maps buried foundations without ever moving a single stone. That's what transformed the search. It moved it from speculation into science, and that lets researchers do something. It lets them separate the enduring myth from the physical truth. To find the real places that inspired legends like El Dorado. Now, the focus of this journey, that vast period from around the 5th to the 15th centuries, it was a paradox. It was an age of stunning city building. Grand metropolises rose up as centers of trade and faith and power. But it was also an age of silence because many of those same places were left empty. Their stories were interrupted, and the reasons for those endings, they're the key to the legacy. Shifts in climate that altered rivers and harvests. Changes in trade routes that left ports stranded. The profound challenges of widespread illness, or just the slow turning of political fortunes, all of that played a part. And by understanding why these urban centers faded, it's not just studying the past, it's gathering wisdom for our own world, which is crowded and interconnected. Every fragment, from a humble piece of pottery to the grandest carved stone, it's a sentence in a much larger story about resilience and adaptation, and that enduring human impulse to build communities. So with that foundation, we can begin the exploration of the first of these 20 lost cities, a place where myth and history are forever entangled. Those shared threads, they're what make a group of ruins feel like a conversation. You go from one lost city to another, and after a while you start to hear a rhythm. A set of echoes, from a jungle in Cambodia to a desert in Africa, the same patterns come back. The first echo is environmental fragility. Over and over, you see how a changing relationship with the land could unravel a metropolis. A long drought slowly draining a vital reservoir, centuries of cutting timber for construction, stripping away the forests until the soil just washes away. These weren't sudden disasters, they were slow, mounting pressures, testing a society's ingenuity right to the limit. And it's a reminder the foundation of any great city isn't just its stone walls. It's the relationship with the water, the soil, the climate that sustains it. Then there's cultural resilience. A city can be abandoned, its people scattered. But the identity they built often endures. It sleeps in the stones, the symbols carved into a temple wall, the layout of a plaza, the style of a gateway. These are messages. A culture's signature, waiting centuries for someone to read it again. That resilience of memory shows something. Political power can be fleeting, but the artistic and spiritual expressions of a people, they have a remarkable endurance. Rediscovering them isn't just archaeology, it's a kind of reunion that leads to a third pattern: interconnectedness. In the medieval world, distance was vast but connections were real. A trade route like the Silk Road wasn't just a path for silk and spices, it was a nervous system, Ideas, faiths, technologies, artistic styles, they flowed along those channels. A city in the highlands of Ethiopia might be using glass beads from India. A port in Southeast Asia shaped by architectural ideas from Persia. So the decline of one major hub, it didn't happen in isolation. It could send a tremor through the whole network, leaving other cities suddenly isolated, their purpose fading. The story of one city is often, secretly, the story of many. And this brings a final theme: historical silence. How does an entire city, home to thousands, just vanish from the world's memory? Sometimes it was deliberate erasure. A new regime rewriting history, letting the old capitals be reclaimed by the forest. More often, it was the slow, quiet work of time itself. Generations pass, oral traditions fade. The location of a once great place dissolves into legend, mentioned only in fragments of poetry or travelers' tales deemed too fanciful to be true. That silence is a powerful reminder how fragile our collective story really is. It underscores why every trowel of dirt turned, every map from laser scans, is an act of recovering a voice. It's about listening for the whispers in the silence. And in doing that, hearing a more complete story of who we are, how we built this world together. The whispers in the silence, they take you to a place. Stone and jungle locked together, deep in Cambodia, the spires of Angkor Wat. A monument everyone knows, but for centuries that temple was seen as an isolated thing. A solitary masterpiece just sitting in the wilderness. The truth is different. Modern archaeology shows it. Angkor Wat wasn't alone, it was the heart. The dazzling heart of a lost metropolis, a city of staggering scale, and its secrets are just starting to come out. This came from the sky, using LiDAR. Archaeologists looked through the jungle canopy. The landscape underneath told a different story. What looked like untouched wilderness was actually a planned grid. A sprawling network over 1,000 square kilometers. The scans showed canals like highways, raised roads connecting districts, the subtle mounds of hundreds of smaller temples unknown. This wasn't just a ceremonial center. This was a living city. One of the largest the world had ever seen before the industrial age. The genius of Angkor was water. Khmer engineers took a challenging environment and mastered it. Hydraulic mastery. They built vast reservoirs, barrages, an intricate web of canals and moats. This system did more than look majestic. It captured the monsoon rains, stored that water through the dry season, distributed it across a vast agricultural landscape. A civilization engineered around the flow of water. It allowed a population to thrive, maybe 1 million people. The city was a machine, water was its fuel. Which makes the decline in the 15th century a puzzle. The old idea of a sudden invasion doesn't hold anymore. Researchers see a convergence of pressures. Decades of intense monsoon rains, they may have overwhelmed the waterworks, causing catastrophic flooding, erosion. The very infrastructure that defined the city could have helped undo it. At the same time, trade shifted. Economic power moved to coastal ports. Spiritual practices changed, lessening the role of the god-king. It was likely a slow unraveling. A series of interconnected challenges. The population gradually dispersed, leaving the stone heart of their world to the waiting forest. The work at Angkor now is a lesson in how technology rewrites history. A lost city isn't always a place that vanished without a trace. Sometimes it's a place we've been looking at for centuries, but never truly saw. The jungle didn't conquer Angkor, it guarded it, preserved the footprint of a metropolis until we developed the eyes to see its true scale. This redefines medieval urbanism, a level of planning, of environmental management that rivals any ancient wonder, and it asks a quiet question: if we could miss something this vast for this long, what other worlds are still hidden, waiting to be seen again? Granite walls rising out of the savannah, Great Zimbabwe in southern Africa, a city that lasted for centuries, but it wasn't in the jungles or along rivers. Its wealth came from gold, from ivory, trade that went from the interior to the coast and out into the world. The stonework there, the scale of it, massive walls built without any mortar. Just stone fitted against stone, curving around the hills. This wasn't just a town, it was the center of a kingdom, a statement made entirely in granite. For a long time, European colonizers said Africans couldn't have built it. They came up with other stories, Phoenicians or the Queen of Sheba, but archaeology tells a different story. This city is African completely. Its rediscovery, proper study that became a way to reclaim history, to challenge the old narratives that dismissed the continent's past. The ruins themselves are laid out in three main parts. The hill complex up high, probably for spiritual and ceremonial things. Then the great enclosure with that solid conical tower. What was it for? A grain store, a symbol of power, a place for gatherings? We still don't know. It's a quiet mystery right at the heart of the place. And then the valley complex, a series of smaller enclosures. That's likely where the artisans lived, the traders, most of the population. You can see a social structure in that layout. A hierarchy right there in the stone. Archaeologists find things in the soil, pottery fragments from China, from Persia, glass beads that shows the trade networks, how far they reached. Iron tools, workshop remains. This was a connected place, a hub in the medieval world. But by the mid-15th century, the city was mostly abandoned. The reasons aren't written down, you have to read them in the land. One strong possibility is the environment. Supporting a large elite population, all their cattle, it might have exhausted the local resources. The soil overworked, trees cut down for building and fuel, changing the local climate. The city's own success might have led to its decline, and at the same time, the trade routes that were its lifeblood, they may have shifted. New powers emerged, offering different paths to the coast. The economic foundation just slowly eroded. It probably wasn't a sudden collapse, more a gradual dispersal. People moved on, took their culture and knowledge with them, founded new centers of power elsewhere. The stone capital was left behind to the wind, but the legacy of great Zimbabwe never really faded. It lived on in oral tradition, in the symbol of those walls. Today, it's a testament to pre-colonial innovation, to statecraft. It speaks to architectural genius, to economic savvy, to a society that commanded respect across the Indian Ocean. Its rediscovery forced a rewriting of the history books. It proved complex urban civilization in southern Africa wasn't an imported idea, it was homegrown. This city, once dismissed, now stands on the nation's flag. It's a reminder that history is buried not just in the earth, but under layers of assumption. And to find the truth, you have to listen to what the stones have been saying all along. Merv was a city in Central Asia. It was a library, a marketplace, a fortress. For centuries, people on the Silk Road spoke its name with awe. They called it the mother of the world. Caravans came from China, Persia, India, the Mediterranean. They brought silk and spices, they brought ideas. It was a crossroads for faiths, for languages, for technologies, and what's left now is overwhelming. Because Merv isn't one lost city, it's several, a series of walled compounds, each one right next to the other, each one a different empire over 2,000 years. You can walk from the ancient Achaemenid foundations into the Seljuk metropolis. The story is written in mud brick and stone. Life here was possible because of ingenuity. The landscape is arid. The water systems were a masterpiece. They built canals called canals tunneled from distant mountains. They brought a steady flow to the fields and to the city's baths. They built massive ice houses to store winter ice for the blistering summer heat. This was comfort. It allowed a vibrant urban culture to flourish. Merv had renowned libraries. It had observatories. It was a center for astronomy, for mathematics, for philosophy. The city was a living text, a repository of knowledge from across the known world. Which makes 1221 difficult to comprehend. That year, the armies of the Mongol Empire arrived. The city had formidable walls, but it wasn't prepared for the scale of what followed. The event was a profound tragedy. The center of learning and commerce came to a sudden, devastating end. The loss was incalculable, in lives, in culture, in knowledge that was scattered and destroyed. It's a sobering reminder. No matter how grand or advanced a civilization becomes, it can remain vulnerable. Yet the story doesn't end there. Modern archaeology is doing something remarkable. It's moving beyond kings and conquests to listen for the voices of the people who made the city live. Excavations now focus on the suburbs, the industrial quarters, where the potters, the metalworkers, the weavers, the traders lived and worked. In these areas, they're finding the true engine of the Silk Road. Fragments of everyday pottery, local styles mixed with foreign influences, the remains of workshops where glass was blown and metals were forged. This paints a picture of a cosmopolitan, working-class population. The people who sustained the entire enterprise. It reveals the resilience of daily life, even in the shadow of empires. By uncovering these spaces, archaeologists aren't just finding a lost city. They're recovering the hum of its streets, the smell of its workshops, the diverse, bustling reality of a place that was, for a time, a mother to the world. And they ask us to look past its ending, to remember the centuries of connection and innovation that made it shine. 5,000 years ago, a city was built in a desert valley. In Peru, in the Soup River Valley, it's a stark place, green along the river, dry hills all around. The people there, the Caral people, they built with earth and reeds. They made huge pyramids, sunken circular plazas, whole neighborhoods. That's Caral soup. It's older than the pyramids in Egypt, and for a very long time, no one remembered it was there. Finding it didn't just make civilization in the Americas older. It raised a quiet question, a puzzle in adobe and silence. The layout of Caral shows real planning. 6 big pyramid structures, not for tombs but for ceremonies. They're set around a huge central plaza. Different neighborhoods for different classes spread out from there. They had amphitheaters, temples, irrigation for farming. This wasn't a village that just happened. This was a city built on purpose, a society working together. And the most surprising thing about them isn't what they left behind, it's what they didn't. After years of digging, there's no sign of walls for defense. No mass graves from battles, no caches of weapons. Their art shows musicians, farmers, gods not warriors. Caral seems to have lasted 1,000 years in peace. That peace makes you rethink an old idea. A big theory in archaeology said that war, the need to fight and conquer, was what forced people to build complex states. Caral is a counterpoint. It suggests another way. That shared belief, working together on big projects, the benefits of trade and ritual, that could be enough to hold a society together. What they found there shows a culture tied to the sky and to sound. They found flutes made from condor and pelican bones, finely made. They found signs of using plants in ceremonies for visions. This was a society that put its energy into spiritual life, into music, into gathering. Their power came from working together and shared belief, not from fear. Their influence was wide. You see traces of trade networks all through the Andes. They had anchovies, shellfish from the Pacific coast, hundreds of kilometers away. They had seeds and plants from the Amazon. Caral was a hub. It was a center for exchanging goods and also ideas, cultural practices. That connectedness, that web of trade and society, probably gave them stability. It created a mutual dependence, a shared prosperity that made conflict pointless. The city's long life, 1,000 years, means this model worked. Then, around 3,800 years ago, they left the city. Carefully, it wasn't attacked or burned. It was like they just walked away, closed things up. The main theory goes back to the environment. A big earthquake might have wrecked the irrigation. Or a long climate shift dried out the valley. Faced with an ecological problem they couldn't fix, the people probably left in an organized way. They took their knowledge and traditions with them into the highlands and along the coast. That's why Caral, even though it's so ancient, matters to this story. It's the foundation, the first major experiment in city life in the Americas. The patterns set here, the ceremonial center with pyramids, the sunken plaza, the focus on trade and making textiles, they became a blueprint. You can see echoes of Caral's ideas 1,000 years later in the Chavin culture, and 1,000 years after that in the Inca Empire. Cusco, Machu Picchu, those later wonders didn't come from nothing. They inherited an urban tradition that started in a desert valley with a peaceful people who built their monuments toward the sky and for each other. Caral tells a different origin story, one where civilization might begin not with a war cry but with the sound of a flute on the wind. Caral was in the desert. Then there's Birka, an island in a Swedish lake. From the 8th to the 10th century, for 200 years, it was this engine of the Viking age, not a raiding camp. A planned town, a hub. You had silver coins from Baghdad, silk from Constantinople. This was the gateway where the Norse world met the East. Archaeology on Birka Island shows this order. It's a grid. There were districts for blacksmiths, for bead makers, jetties built out into the lake for ships, a ring fort up on the hill standing guard. That's urban planning, Viking style. The story is in the graves. There are over 3,000, and through analysis you see the reach. One woman was buried with a dress. It had 2 bronze buttons. The design is Carolingian from continental Europe. Another grave had a small Buddha, ivory, likely from northern India. There are silver coins from Samarkand, glass beakers from the Rhineland, textiles from Byzantine workshops. Each object is a point on a map. Together, they chart a trade network, a breathtaking scale. This wasn't occasional, it was a constant flow. Furs and amber went south and east. Silk and silver and spices came back. Birka was the exchange point, where goods changed hands and stories were traded too. Then around 970, it slows. The graves stop. Within a generation or two, Birka is quiet. The focus shifts to Sigtuna, a new town on the mainland. The harbors may have silted up, made it hard for the deeper ships to dock. Political power was consolidating. Swedish kings favored new centers they could control. And the trade routes were changing, bypassing the lake system for more direct paths. It was likely a combination, a slow turning of the economic tides. But Birka's legacy isn't abandonment. Its existence rewrites the story. It shows the Norsemen weren't just raiders, they were merchants, town dwellers. Connected to a global medieval economy, the island is silent now, but for 2 centuries the world came together there, where a piece of Indian ivory could end up in a Scandinavian grave. Whispering of connections stretched across continents, there's a city in the Pacific built on a coral reef, Madol. The name means the spaces between. And that's what it is, a city of channels, over 90 artificial islets, all set in a shallow lagoon. The stones are the story, colossal basalt logs. Some weigh many tons, stacked like lumber into walls 25 feet high. To stand there is to feel a kind of awe, and one question, how? The nearest quarry is on the other side of Pohnpei. No wheels, no large animals. This was a society of canoe builders. The theory is they moved these megaliths by raft, floating the stones on bamboo pontoons across the lagoon. A feat of coordination. It would have taken generations. It speaks to a social order, immense power. The Saudeleur dynasty ruled from here for centuries. Lords of Delor, Madol was their statement, a ceremonial capital designed to separate the elite from everyone else. The central islet held the royal mortuary. A sacred space, others housed priests and artisans, the rituals that held their rule, the canals were the streets, movement was by canoe, so access was controlled. This was power expressed through isolation, through awe, but now research is looking past the stones to the softer ground beneath, using sonar and core samples. Reading an environmental ledger and finding something, that the construction of Madol might have caused its decline. To build the islets, they likely cleared huge tracts of mangrove forest. Mangroves are the coastline's kidneys. They filter water, prevent erosion, nurture fish. Removing them would have had effects. Siltation could have choked the lagoon. Fish stocks, a vital food source, might have dwindled. The agricultural land on the main island, supporting the workers, could have suffered. The city, in its isolation, might have slowly strangled its own lifelines. By the time European explorers arrived in the 19th century, Madol was a shell. The dynasty had fallen, the story woven into legend. The city of Canals left to the quiet encroachment of the mangrove roots it had displaced. So Madol is a dual lesson, a testament to what human vision can achieve, even in the most remote settings, and a reminder that no society, no matter how ingeniously it builds, exists apart from the environment that sustains it. The spaces between the stones now hold a whisper about balance and the unintended consequences of ambition. The stones at Arsuf are still warm. This is a port city on the cliffs in Israel. It was known as Apollonia long ago. Its story is built in layers, each new power built right on top of the last one. But the most dramatic layer came with the Crusaders. They arrived in the medieval period and renamed the place Arsuf. They built a fortress here, a stronghold. It became a key piece for the Crusader states. Excavating here is like turning pages in a book. Each page has a different author. You see Phoenician foundations first, then Roman villas with mosaic floors. And then, right on top, the massive walls of the Crusader castle. They used the old stones, but it was more than just convenience. It was a statement. Building their new world on the pillars of the old one, the castle itself is a Frankish design, a military fortress from Europe planted here. Archaeologists have cleared its gates, the deep moat, the central keep. But outside the castle walls, the story gets blended. They found a church, a Latin Christian church, and then nearby, in the industrial zone, they found a glass workshop. Furnaces, raw materials, fragments of beautiful glass vessels. The analysis of that glass is important. The makers used local sand, techniques that were 1,000 years old from the Roman era. That means something. The rulers were European knights, but the artisans, the people doing the work, were likely local, Christians or Muslims, carrying on a craft tradition that was already ancient here. So daily life was a mixture. Pottery shards show that, Byzantine glazed ware, simple local pots, imported ceramics from Italy, coins from Acre, from Damascus, from farther away. All found together. For a time, Arsuf worked. It was a hybrid society, cultures meeting, sometimes in conflict, but often just in the quiet business of living. That makes the end of the city sharper. In 1265, the Mamluk Sultan Baybars laid siege to Arsuf. The archaeology of the siege is detailed. You can see where the siege engines hit the walls. You can find evidence of the defenders' last stand. The city fell after a hard fight, and then Baybars did something decisive. He ordered the fortress and the city to be destroyed. Systematically, walls toppled, buildings razed. This was policy, a denial, to make sure the Crusaders could never come back and use this port. He left Arsuf as a broken monument on the cliff. Now the ruins are quiet. The shattered castle stones tell one story, a story of final violence, but the smaller finds tell another one. The glass fragments, the mixed coins, the blend of pottery, they speak of a frontier, a crossroads, where different people lived and worked together, even within a war. Arsuf's legacy is that duality, the fragility of conquest, and the enduring patterns of daily life that go on beneath the great battles. Angkor's grid didn't start there. It ended there, that whole idea of a planned city. It began up on a mountain. In Cambodia, there's this plateau, Phnom Kulen, a flat stone table rising out of the jungle. For a long time, it was just a name in inscriptions, Mahendraparvata, a legendary city, but the forest kept it hidden. Then they used lasers, airborne laser scanning. It looked through the canopy, and underneath they saw a blueprint, a city in a perfect grid. This was the early 800s, 300 years before Angkor Wat. Mahendraparvata was the missing link, the prototype. The scans showed a deliberate plan, straight roads north-south, east-west, a geometric shape cut into the mountain. They found dams and canals, early water management, and temples, some with detailed carvings. A royal capital. This was the Khmer Empire forming, that moment when sacred geography and state power were being fused. The mountain was chosen for a reason. Phnom Kulen is considered the empire's birthplace, where the first Khmer king was consecrated. Putting the capital there was a statement. It rooted the kingdom in myth, in spirituality, in the high ground. The grid was order imposed on the wild, a declaration of control. But this mountain capital didn't last long. Within decades, maybe less than a century, the court moved down to the plains, to the site that became Angkor. So why leave, why abandon a city that's symbolic? The research suggests practical limits. The plateau was sacred but difficult, the terrain was rugged, the soil was thin, poor for large-scale farming. The water system was innovative but hard to scale for a growing population. The isolation that made it sacred also made it inefficient. Ruling an expanding empire from a remote mountain is hard. Supplying a court is a constant struggle. The move to the plains was probably strategic, a shift from a symbolic capital to a practical one. The plains had fertile land. A massive lake for water, a central location for trade and control. Mahendraparvata was the first draft, a bold experiment that proved the concept, a gridded, water-managed Khmer city. But the plains were where that concept could scale into a metropolis. The knowledge from the mountain, the grid, the canals, the temples, it wasn't lost. It was the seed, carried down to the lowlands and allowed to grow into something vast. So the legacy of Mahendraparvata isn't its longevity, it's the vision. It shows the moment the Khmer blueprint was drawn, a plan so powerful it shaped a landscape for centuries. The forest took back the mountain city. It preserved that first sketch. Until technology let us see it, the origin of an idea, written in the silent geometry under the trees. Gold writes its own history. It leaves a trail. A shimmering line across deserts through time. There's a place in northeastern Mali, far from any ocean. A city once thrived there, right on that trail. Tadmekka, the name in Arabic means something like the Mecca, that's a hint. For centuries, it was a vital node, where the gold of West Africa met the Sahara's trade routes. A cosmopolitan hub in all that rock and sand. Arab historians wrote about it. They called it a legendary market town, a place of wealth and craft. For a long time, that's all it was, a name in old texts. Then archaeologists found it. The ruins are on a rocky plateau, and the evidence they found was direct. They found stone molds for casting gold coins. Not just any coins, these were imitations of the gold dinars from the Abbasid Caliphate, way over in the Middle East. That's a profound clue. It means Tadmekka wasn't just a pass-through, it was a mint, a center of financial power. Local rulers were taking raw gold from nearby fields and turning it into a currency recognized across the Islamic world. They were inserting themselves directly into a global economic system. Its location made that possible. Tadmekka sat on a critical trans-Saharan route. Caravans of camels would arrive from the north, sometimes thousands strong. They brought salt precious here. They brought copper, textiles, books, ideas. They would leave laden with gold, ivory, slaves. The city was a translator. It converted the natural wealth of the African interior into a form the wider medieval world understood. The community would have been a mix: local Songhai and Tuareg traders, Berber merchants from the north, Muslim scholars, a blend of languages, faiths, customs, all orbiting around gold. Today, understanding Tadmekka's full story is a race against more than time. The region's instability makes sustained archaeology difficult, dangerous. Researchers use remote sensing, satellite imagery. They analyze materials already collected. They're piecing together puzzles. How large was the city at its peak? How did it manage water in that harsh environment? What was its political relationship with the great empires nearby, like Ghana, later Mali? Each answer points to a broader truth. Tadmekka embodies a wealth and connectivity that flourished in medieval West Africa. Long before European ships ever appeared on the coast, this wasn't an isolated backwater. It was a sophisticated, outward-looking society where global economics met local ingenuity on a sun-baked plateau. Its silent stones hold a counter-narrative now. One that speaks of African agency, of innovation, of a continent that was a central player in the medieval world's story of exchange. Tadmekka's gold was a currency of connection. But on another continent, wealth was measured differently. In water and stone, deep in the Guatemalan rainforest, the Maya built their civilization. They wove their cities right into the living fabric of the jungle. For a long time, we saw places like Tikal as islands, grand pyramids and plazas rising up from a sea of green, separated by miles of untouched wilderness. That picture is wrong now. New technology has peeled back the canopy, and it reveals something far more astonishing: the region around the ancient city of Homel. It's not a collection of isolated temples. It's a single, sprawling megalopolis, a continuous urban landscape stretching for hundreds of square miles. LiDAR surveys show it in detail. What looked like empty jungle is actually a meticulously engineered terrain, countless residential platforms for houses, vast networks of agricultural terraces climbing the hillsides, reservoirs for capturing rainwater, and a web of raised stone roadways, the Sakbiob, connecting everything. This was a low-density city on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Not a dense, walled European town, but a vast, integrated garden city. Millions of people likely lived in this interconnected web. Their homes nestled among fields and forest. This redefines the classic Maya. They weren't just building ceremonial centers, they were master landscape architects, shaping an entire environment into a sustainable, living urban system. The challenge now is to understand how it worked. How did such a diffuse society manage its resources? How was water allocated across thousands of households? How did goods and information flow along those stone causeways? The answers are coming from the ground at Homel itself. Excavations there show a political heart beating within the green sprawl. Elaborate palace complexes where rulers lived, intricately painted tombs holding the remains of elites, accompanied by jade and pottery from far-reaching trade, and then the hieroglyphic inscriptions. They tell a story not of unity, but of fierce competition. Homel was caught in a centuries-long rivalry between two superpower dynasties, the Kingdom of the Snake, based at Calakmul, and the Kingdom of Tikal. This wasn't just occasional battles, it was a relentless political and economic struggle for dominance over people, over trade routes, over loyalty. Local rulers at Homel would align with one great power, then the other, navigating a dangerous landscape of alliances. This vibrant, sophisticated urban world thrived for centuries. Then, around 900 CE, the network began to fail. The collapse wasn't a single event. It was a slow unraveling of the very systems that made the megalopolis possible. The strain of supporting a huge population combined with periods of intense drought, it likely pushed the water and agricultural systems past their limits. And the political conflicts that once fueled dynamism may have shattered cooperation, making a coordinated response to the crisis impossible. The result was a gradual dispersal. Families left their terraced fields and platform homes. The forest moved back in, covering the causeways and palaces, holding this vast urban experiment in a deep green silence for over 1,000 years. Homel's legacy is a lesson in scale and fragility. It shows a civilization that achieved something unique, a way of living with the jungle, not against it. To create one of the world's most extensive ancient urban landscapes, and its story reminds us that the greatest systems depend on a delicate balance. A balance between human ambition and the enduring rhythms of the natural world that sustains it. The Maya's green sprawl ends, then there's this high plateau. Volcanic rock in Ethiopia. The name Lalibela means wonder. 11 churches, each one carved from a single block of stone, monolithic. They look like they erupted from the ground. For a long time, that was the story, a singular miracle, a pilgrimage place cut off, but that's changing. The famous churches aren't the whole thing. They're the centerpiece, the most dramatic part of a much larger world that's been hidden. Recent surveys are mapping the hills around them, and they're finding a lost monastic city. Dozens of other structures carved from the rock, hermit cells, where holy men and women went for solitude, tombs, dining halls, the faint outlines of where people lived. This wasn't a lonely outpost, it was a community, bustling, organized, devout, the work of the Zagwe dynasty. That was the 12th and 13th centuries. A major Christian kingdom asserting its faith and power in stone. To understand Lalibela, you have to look past the grand facades. Archaeologists are looking at the logistics. How they did it. The rock is a soft, red volcanic tuff. Teams of artisans would have carved down from the top, defining the outer shape of a church first. Then hollowing out the interior, creating columns, altars, windows, all from the living rock. It was a subtractive art, a process of revelation, not construction. But supporting thousands of workers and pilgrims and residents required more than faith. It required water. The surveys are showing a hydraulic system. Ingenious, a network of channels and cisterns carved into the stone to catch rainwater, to store it. That infrastructure was the lifeblood. It let a permanent population thrive up there in that high altitude. Daily life was a rhythm, devotion and community. Pilgrims would travel for weeks to reach this new Jerusalem. They'd stay in simple stone shelters, participate in ceremonies that filled the carved courtyards with chant and incense. The residents, priests, artisans, farmers, they sustained this economy of faith. Every chisel mark tells that story, a story of collective purpose, a society that directed immense resources toward a spiritual vision. These new findings change Lalibela's place in history. It wasn't an isolated wonder. It was the beating heart of a sophisticated polity. The Zagwe kings used this project to cement their legitimacy. To create a pilgrimage site that could rival the ancient centers of Christian power, the city was a statement, a declaration that here on this African plateau was a beacon of faith and learning. The quiet cells in the hills, the water channels, the settlement traces, they speak of a living landscape, a holy city alive with the footsteps of the faithful. Its legacy endures, not just in the awe of the churches, but in the rediscovery of the community that made them possible, a reminder that even the most breathtaking monuments come from the quiet, daily work of countless hands. The legacy of urban planning moves through time. It doesn't belong to one civilization alone. Centuries after the Indus Valley cities, like Mohenjo-Daro, had faded, that same spirit of order appeared again, much further south. In the rocky terrain of Karnataka in India, a new capital was built, Vijayanagara, the city of victory. From the 14th to the 16th centuries, it was the center of a huge Hindu empire. A statement made in stone and water, its ruins now cover dozens of square kilometers. They show a later peak in how cities were designed. For a long time, people who visited focused on the temple complexes. The Vitala temple with its musical pillars, but the real story of Vijayanagara is being found outside those sacred walls. In the urban core, excavations keep revealing the busy city that supported the empire's spiritual life. They're uncovering the foundations of large bazaars where diamonds and spices were traded, the remains of aqueducts, networks of stone channels, and the outlines of dense residential quarters set up in organized sectors. This was a living metropolis, home to hundreds of thousands. Its genius, like the ancient Indus cities before it, was about water. The city was built along the Tungabhadra River. But the land was rugged and dry, so the engineers of Vijayanagara performed a kind of hydraulic alchemy. They built an elaborate system of canals and channels to divert the river. They constructed massive tanks, reservoirs, to store the monsoon rains. They even carved aqueducts right through the living rock to guide water across the landscape. This network did more than supply drinking water. It fed agriculture, it filled ceremonial tanks, it created a lush, garden-like setting inside the city itself. It was a masterclass in sustainable design, creating abundance in a difficult place. This carefully managed world met a sudden end. In 1565, a coalition of rival sultanates faced the Vijayanagara army at the Battle of Talikota. The empire was catastrophically defeated. The victorious armies then marched on the capital. What followed wasn't just a military conquest, it was a systematic dismantling. Over months, the great city was methodically destroyed. Temples were defaced, palaces were pulled down, the magnificent infrastructure was broken, an act meant to erase not just a political rival, but the symbol of its power. The population scattered, the city was abandoned, and the jungle began its slow reclamation. So Vijayanagara's story is a dual lesson. It stands as a peerless example of human ingenuity. In urban planning, in environmental harmony, a direct descendant of ancient principles, and its fate is a sobering reminder of imperial fragility, how the complex achievements of centuries can be vulnerable to shifting political fortunes. The ruins today aren't just a monument to what was lost, they're an open textbook. Every exposed aqueduct, every mapped street adds to our understanding of how a great pre-modern city functioned and thrived and ultimately fell silent. We go north from Vijayanagara now to another empire. This one was built on horses and on the loyalty of warriors. The Mongolian steppe is a vast open space, grassland under a huge sky. It doesn't seem like a place for a permanent capital, but in the 13th century, the rulers of the largest land empire chose to put a city there. Karakorum, Genghis Khan founded it as a symbolic center, but his son Gede built it up for a nomadic people that was a statement, a fixed heart for an empire of movement. Excavations there by international teams have pulled back the grass. They show a city that surprises you. You see the signs of power you'd expect, a big, ornate palace with glazed tiles and decorated floors. That matches the grandeur travelers described, but you also see something more telling, the everyday life of a global crossroads. They've found different places of worship. A Buddhist temple, the foundations of a Nestorian Christian church, evidence of Islamic prayer spaces and Taoist shrines, all inside the same walls. This wasn't just policy, it was the lived reality. The capital pulled in administrators, artisans, merchants from every conquered territory. The archaeology shows this diversity in action. Sophisticated workshops made fine jewelry, massive bronze cauldrons. A state-run foundry on a remarkable scale produced coins and ritual objects. The artifacts are a map. Chinese porcelain, Persian metalwork, Central Asian textiles. Karakorum wasn't really an administrative engine. It was more a symbolic stage, a place for the Mongol elite to gather, receive tribute, project their universal sovereignty. For researchers, the real question is how this fixed city worked inside a nomadic system. The empire was governed through a decentralized network, loyal commanders, flexible laws. The capital's role seems to have been ceremonial, economic, and diplomatic. It was a treasury, a marketplace for luxury goods, a theater where subject peoples performed their loyalty. Its economy thrived on the circulation of tribute, on trade along protected routes. Its decline was tied to the empire's own fragmentation. As the Khanates grew apart, the unity Karakorum represented became less relevant. The political center shifted. Kublai Khan moved his capital to Khanbalik, what would become Beijing. The flow of wealth and people slowed, then stopped. By the late 14th century, the city was mostly abandoned. Its materials were scavenged. Its memory faded back into the steppe. So the ongoing research at Karakorum is piecing together a paradox. How a culture born on horseback created a stationary hub, a place that briefly became one of the most cosmopolitan spots on Earth. It's a reminder, empires aren't just about conquest. They're also about synthesis, about creating a space, however temporary, where the whole world seems to gather, in one quiet corner of the grassland. The walls at Gede are made of coral stone. They're in a forest now. It's quiet. This place, it wasn't about conquest. It was about prosperity. You can see that in the details. It's a Swahili town from the 15th century, preserved in Kenya in the Arabuko Sokok forest. And you walk through, and it's not just a mosque or a palace. It's a whole community, houses, wells, tombs, all built from that coastal coral stone. But the small things, they tell you more. In the bigger homes, they found something. Sophisticated flush toilets, an underground plumbing system for sanitation. So this wasn't a crude place. Comfort was a priority, privacy, public health. The level of planning, it rivals cities far to the north. Gede's wealth came from the sea. It was a key part of the Indian Ocean trade. Their ships would catch the monsoon winds. East to India for textiles and spices, to the Persian Gulf for glass and ceramics, even to China for porcelain, and they'd come back loaded with things from the African interior. Ivory, timber, gold, ambergris, the people here were the middlemen, the merchants. They were translators in a way. The artifacts show that reach, pieces of Celadon pottery from China's Ming dynasty. Islamic inscriptions on the tombs, glass beads from India, cowrie shells used as money. Each object is a connection, linking this forest town to half the world. That blend created a unique culture, Swahili culture, African Bantu roots mixed with Arabic, Persian, Indian influences. You see it in the architecture. You hear it in the language. Gede was a Muslim town, the mosques face Mecca, but the daily rhythm, the social fabric, that was deeply African. Then, by the early 17th century, it was abandoned. The forest just moved in, took over the streets, and there's no clear reason, no sign of violence, no burning. The theories point to something slower. Environmental pressure. Their wells were sophisticated, but they may have failed. The water table dropped, maybe from overuse or a drought. That could have made it impossible. Other ideas, political shifts. The rising power of places like Malindi or Mombasa might have drawn the trade away, left Gede stranded, or maybe social tensions. A gradual, organized exodus. People just left, took their things and their stories, left a ghost town. Now the research focuses on the people, behind the plumbing and the porcelain. By studying the neighborhoods, the house sizes, the tombs, they're piecing together the social hierarchy. Who were the elite merchants? Where did the artisans live? The fishermen, how did this diverse community govern itself? Each answer adds to the understanding. It shows a world of sophisticated, autonomous city-states. Thriving on trade and exchange long before Europeans came around the Cape, Gede's presence is serene, haunting. It corrects the old narratives. It's a monument to African urban innovation. To global connection, a sophisticated world built on commerce and community, not empire. The doorways are empty now. They frame the forest, but for 2 centuries they opened onto a bustling, worldly town. A town listening for sails on the horizon. Vadzia was a city that grew inward, carved into the cliff, not rising up. The face of Reshaped Mountain in Georgia, it's a sheer wall with a honeycomb of chambers. A vertical labyrinth on 13 distinct levels. It wasn't just a monastery, it was a self-contained world, built in the 12th century under Queen Tama's reign. Designed as a spiritual sanctuary and a fortress, faith and survival etched into the same stone. The scale is breathtaking. Hundreds of apartments, churches, storerooms. Wine cellars, all connected by a network of tunnels, hidden passages. An intricate irrigation system channeled water from mountain springs into the complex. That allowed a community, maybe 2,000 monks and artisans and soldiers, to live for months, completely cut off. The motivation was clear. The Caucasus was a volatile crossroads. The looming threat of Mongol invasions made a defensible stronghold a necessity. Vadzia was the answer. Its entrance was concealed high on the cliff. The main access was a hidden tunnel which could be sealed or defended by a handful of people, a place designed to endure a siege, to protect not just lives but a culture. Ongoing archaeological work keeps finding surprises behind collapsed rockfalls. New chambers emerge. Their walls still bear vibrant frescoes. These paintings are a window. They depict Queen Tama, a revered ruler, alongside saints and biblical scenes. The art served a purpose beyond beauty. In the dim, candlelit caves, these images were a visual scripture. A constant reinforcement of identity and belief for a community under pressure. The layout shows a meticulously planned society. The different levels had specific functions. The higher, more secure levels housed the churches and the monks' quarters. Lower levels were for storage, workshops, communal living. The system was a marvel of medieval engineering, balancing structural integrity with practical daily life. So the story of Vadzia is one of adaptation, turning vulnerability into strength. When the landscape offers no flat ground for walls, you make the mountain itself your fortress. When your world is under threat, you build a community that looks inward, drawing resilience from shared faith, from ingenious design. Its silent halls, now being documented, speak to that impulse. To create a place of safety, to preserve what matters most, not by fleeing but by digging in, by building a hidden world of astonishing complexity. There was another pyramid across the Atlantic. But this one was made of earth, Monk's Mound at Cahokia. It's a massive earthen platform, the biggest one north of Mexico. It sits on the floodplain where the Missouri and Mississippi rivers come together. For a long time, people thought it was just an isolated ceremonial site, an impressive one but alone. Now we know that's not right. Cahokia was a metropolis. A planned city with tens of thousands of people, and its influence spread across the continent. We're only starting to see the full scale of it with new methods. Scientists aren't just studying the mounds anymore, they're reading the soil. The chemistry of the soil changes where things used to be, where wooden houses stood, where people cooked or worked in workshops. Even the open plazas, it leaves a trace, and that trace shows a map. A city laid out with clear intention. Different districts aligned with the stars, a whole urban landscape organized around central plazas and those huge mounds. This wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. Cahokia's power came from agriculture and from organization. The floodplain was fertile. It produced huge harvests: corn, squash, beans. That surplus meant people could specialize. Not everyone farmed. There were artisans making ornaments from shell and copper. There were planners, astronomers who lined the city up with the sun. And there were leaders who could organize labor on a massive scale. Just to build Monk's Mound, they had to move over 14 million baskets of earth. By hand, that requires a shared vision, a society that could execute a plan, and its reach went far beyond the city itself. You find Cahokia's signature in distant places. Its pottery styles, stone figurines, materials like copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, these show up in smaller settlements hundreds of miles away. These weren't just trade partners, they were connected, a cultural network, probably political too. Cahokia was the center, the gravitational center of a huge American interaction sphere. Which makes its decline, starting in the 13th century, such a puzzle. There's no sign of invasion, no conquest. The story seems to be about environmental strain and social strain. Tree rings show periods of severe drought that would have stressed the agriculture, and the density of the population itself probably caused problems. Sanitation, resource depletion, the social contract, the thing that allowed those huge projects, might have frayed under that pressure. The grand rituals that once unified people may have stopped working. It looks like a gradual dispersal. People moved out in smaller groups to less crowded areas along the rivers. The great city slowly went quiet. Cahokia's legacy changes the history. It breaks down the old idea that complex urban societies didn't exist in ancient North America. Here was a powerful chiefdom. It created a uniquely American form of urban life. Built not with stone but with earth and wood, built on a deep understanding of the river world, those silent mounds are a testament to the sophistication of indigenous civilizations long before Europeans arrived. A reminder that the roots of this continent's story are deep, they're complex, and they're written in the soil. In 1622, a Portuguese galleon, the São João Baptista, sank in a storm off Namibia. It went down with everything, and it stayed there under the sand and the Atlantic for centuries. Then, in 2008, diamond miners working the seafloor found something. Not diamonds, heavy bars, copper ingots, thousands of them. That was the start, the discovery of a different kind of lost city, a floating one. A single moment, a catastrophe that preserved a whole system in motion. This wreck is a time capsule, an incredibly detailed one. Underwater archaeologists have mapped it all. They've found more than treasure, they've found the ship's bones. The way its timbers were joined, the hull design, it tells a precise story. 17th century Portuguese shipbuilding. This vessel was engineered for one thing: to carry immense wealth from the colonies back to Europe. Its cargo, now scattered, is like an inventory of early modern desire. Those copper ingots, each one stamped, were mined in what's now the Congo. They were headed to Europe to be made into cannons, coins, tools. There was elephant tusk, raw ivory from West Africa, and personal treasure too, gold coins, silver. The crew's everyday things, clay pipes, pewter plates, navigational instruments. Each piece is a point in a network. The copper links mines in Central Africa to foundries in Lisbon. The ivory connects hunters inland to craftsmen in Antwerp or Genoa. The ship was the link, the dangerous conduit. Its voyage was the final, perilous leg of a chain. A chain that started deep inland and ended in European markets. So studying this wreck, it isn't just maritime archaeology. It's a way to dissect early globalization. You see the raw materials of empire, literally weighed down and lost at sea. The human story here is hardship, softened by time but still there. The São João Baptista carried hundreds. Sailors, soldiers, merchants, perhaps enslaved people. The ocean showed no mercy. The excavation treats the site like a resting place. Researchers document every item's placement. This debris field is also a memorial. It speaks to the profound risks of the age of sail, the human cost woven into global trade. This sunken galleon complements the silent stones of cities on land. Angkor needed rice and devotion. Great Zimbabwe needed gold and cattle, Cahokia needed corn and community, and Lisbon, Amsterdam, Seville, they needed the copper and ivory that ships like this carried. The São João Baptista was the connection, the vulnerable, vital connection between the world's producers and its consuming capitals. Its loss, frozen, gives us a snapshot. Not of a city built to last, of a city in transit, a single ship carrying the concentrated wealth of continents, suddenly becoming a lost underwater world. It reminds you the connections between places were fragile as they were ambitious, and that sometimes history is preserved not in grand monuments, but in a quiet field of copper bars resting in the dark. The desert's silence isn't empty, it's a library, and Tayma, this oasis in the northwest of Saudi Arabia, is one of the oldest volumes in that library. It was never a lost city, it's a place that was always here, continuously inhabited for thousands of years. Every new excavation just peels back another layer of that story. For a long time, the story we told about Arabia was one of isolation, a vast, empty desert, nomadic tribes, but what's emerging at Tayma shatters that. It shows a landscape dotted with sophisticated urban centers, hubs of commerce, hubs of diplomacy, the vital nervous system for ancient trade. The scale of the recent archaeology is staggering. They've found the foundations of massive defensive walls, grand temples dedicated to local gods, and they've mapped this sprawling, ingenious water system. Deep wells, some going down dozens of meters, tapping hidden aquifers. That hydraulic mastery was the city's lifeblood. It turned a natural oasis into a guaranteed refuge. So a caravan, after weeks in the desert, knew it would find water here, supplies, safety. That reliability made Tayma a powerhouse, a critical station on the incense route, where the precious resins of the south and spices and textiles began their long journey north to the Mediterranean. But the most startling find wasn't a wall or a well, it was a text, a cuneiform inscription, and it mentions a name from Mesopotamian history, Nabonidus, the last king of Babylon. The inscription confirms this strange episode. For a decade in the 6th century BC, King Nabonidus didn't rule from Babylon. He chose to live here in Tayma. This wasn't exile, it was a strategic relocation. A Babylonian king at the height of his power, setting up his court in a desert oasis 1,000 miles from home. The reasons are still debated. Religious devotion to a lunar god worshipped here, a desire to control the trade routes at their source, or a political move to consolidate power away from the priests in Babylon. Whatever the reason, the fact stands. For a decade, Tayma was effectively a royal capital of the Babylonian Empire, a piece of Mesopotamia transplanted into the Arabian desert. That one fact changes the whole map. It shows Tayma not as some remote outpost, but as a player, a city with the prestige and the infrastructure to host an imperial court. Its leaders were clearly capable of high-stakes diplomacy, of negotiating with empires. The artifacts tell the same story. You find pottery styles from Mesopotamia, alabaster vessels from Egypt, dedications written in Aramaic, the lingua franca of ancient trade. Tayma was a cultural vortex where Babylonian administrators and Arab traders and Aramean scribes and local tribes all intersected. The work at Tayma now, it's doing more than adding a city to a list. It's rewriting the historical role of the Arabian Peninsula. This wasn't a barren periphery, it was a dynamic crossroads. Its oasis cities were linchpins, centers of political intrigue, cultural fusion. They were the stable nodes that made the flow across the desert possible and profitable. The silence at Tayma today is deceptive. Listen, and you can almost hear the bustle of the caravan yard, the clamor of different languages in the market, the quiet talks of kings and merchants under those ancient palms. The trade routes at Tayma were vast, but they weren't the only networks. there was a different kind of web in the high desert of the American Southwest. Woven from community, not caravans, for generations, the story of the ancestral Pueblones has been anchored by one image: the Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde. Those dwellings tucked into the cliffs feel like a final chapter, but new discoveries are showing the story is larger. The society was more expansive. While the national park protects the heart of this world, archaeologists are mapping the forgotten periphery. Across the surrounding mesas and canyons, surveys are bringing hundreds of unknown sites to light. Not just small camps, great houses with dozens of rooms, extensive field systems for corn and squash, long, straight roads cutting across the landscape. This emerging map shows that in the 12th and 13th centuries, this wasn't a collection of isolated villages. It was a thriving, interconnected region. A society with a footprint that stretched for miles, organized around central places, linked by physical pathways and shared traditions. To understand this landscape, researchers are reading two kinds of records. The first is written in the trees. Tree ring dating, dendrochronology, is precise. It can tell you the exact year a roof beam was cut. By compiling thousands of these dates from across the region, a pattern emerges. It shows communities building in one area for a few generations, then relocating to another. This wasn't random wandering. It was a deliberate, cyclical adaptation. They would farm an area, perhaps until the soil needed rest, then move to a new location, often maintaining ties to their old homes. The second record is in the objects they left behind. The style of pottery, the way tools were made, the designs on jewelry, these are cultural signatures. By tracing where certain styles are found, archaeologists can reconstruct social networks. They can see how ideas moved, how marriage partners moved, how cooperative labor parties moved between these great houses and smaller settlements, long before anyone ever built a home in a cliff. This dynamic, dispersed way of life set the stage for what came next. The famous aggregation into the cliff dwellings, beginning in the late 12th century, now appears not as a sudden retreat, but as a logical next step in a long history of adaptation, faced with a confluence of pressures, a prolonged drought that made mesa-top agriculture more difficult, and perhaps increasing social tensions or the threat of conflict. Communities made a strategic choice. They consolidated. They chose defensible, sheltered locations that conserved temperature and moisture. The cliff dwellings were a brilliant solution, but they were the culmination of a societal process, not an isolated event. The subsequent total depopulation of the entire region by the end of the 13th century is one of archaeology's poignant puzzles. The work in the periphery suggests this, too, was likely gradual, not a single catastrophe. As conditions continued to challenge, the social networks that had long connected this landscape became pathways for a final, organized migration. South and east, families and whole communities left, joining relatives who had already settled in areas like the Rio Grande Valley, taking their knowledge, their stories, their architectural traditions with them. The great houses on the mesas were left quiet. The fields were reclaimed by sagebrush, the roads faded, and the cliff palaces stood as silent monuments. To a society that had mastered this harsh, beautiful land for centuries, not by resisting change but by moving with it, their legacy is not one of disappearance but of transformation. Written across a much wider canvas than we ever knew, the Maya world is larger than we thought. In Guatemala's Patane region, in those low, dense wetlands, a place that always seemed too difficult for any major settlement, technology has uncovered something. Something on a huge scale. Recent LiDAR surveys over an area called the Tiger Complex pulled back the forest canopy, and they didn't just find a few more mounds. They found a lost city, a sprawling urban center. It had all the signs of Maya power. Grand pyramids that would have dominated everything, multiple ball courts for that sacred, sometimes political, ceremonial game. A whole network of canals and reservoirs managing the water in that swamp. Early estimates say this place may have rivaled Tikal itself, in size, in importance. For centuries it was just there, under the green cover, completely unknown, and finding it there, in that environment, forces a basic rethink. It means the Maya were more adaptable than we gave them credit for. More capable of engineering their world. They didn't just live in the easy highlands, they conquered the wetlands, they turned them into seats of power. Now the real work starts. Archaeologists, epigraphers, they're heading into the field, their machetes clearing paths that lasers first drew from the air. They want to bring this ghost city back into history, to excavate its plazas, to enter its tombs, and most of all, to read its stones. Somewhere in that complex, they hope to find stelae. Those carved stone pillars, the royal billboards, if they can find them and decipher them, they'll give this place its true name, the names of its kings and queens. Its date in the long calendar, that's the key, because a city this large was never alone. It was a player. It would have had alliances, rivalries, dynastic marriages with the other major powers like Tikal and Calakmul. Uncovering its political story could fill a huge blank spot on the classic Maya map. It could explain old mysteries, why one kingdom rose, why another fell. The answers might be in the untold history of this wetland capital. The Tiger Complex isn't just a new pin on the map, it's a promise that our understanding of this civilization is still incomplete. That the jungle, even now, holds chapters of a story we're only starting to read. The jungle keeps its secrets, the desert keeps its own, but from Mongolia's steppe to the Pacific reefs, there's a connection. A single thread, its ambition meeting time. We build monuments toward the sky. We lay networks across continents, sure they'll last, and the earth holds the evidence for a different truth. That every civilization faces a moment, a letting go. This isn't about endings, it's about echoes. The street grid at Mahendraparvata echoed centuries later in the canals of Angkor. The gold trade at Tadmekka echoed in the porcelain at Gede. The plazas of Caral echoed in the rhythms of Cahokia. Each city we find isn't an isolated ruin. It's a reverberation, proof that ideas traveled like people. They adapted, they took root somewhere new. What we're recovering is a more honest map. A map that challenges the old stories, stories of isolated genius or inevitable conquest. It shows a medieval world that was connected, astonishingly connected. Where a Buddhist statue could end up in a Viking grave, where Persian architecture could shape a port in Southeast Asia, these cities were synapses, firing with exchange long before we had a word for it. Their rediscovery does something. It restores voices to history's quiet corners. It gives back to the Khmer engineers, the Swahili merchants, the ancestral Puebloan farmers, their place as innovators, as cosmopolitans. It corrects a record, often written by later powers, that said their cultures weren't worth remembering. Every laser scan that finds a hidden street, every pottery shard that traces a trade route, it's an act of restorative justice for history itself, so the fragility these places show isn't for despair. It's for clarity. They teach balance, they teach dependence. The greatest society depends on a stable climate, on a reliable water source, on the strength of its social fabric. Their declines were rarely sudden. They were a slow accumulation, environmental pressure, economic pressure, social pressure, until the brilliant adaptation they represented couldn't hold anymore. In their silence, they offer a lesson. In humility, in interdependence, the work isn't finished. For every tiger complex revealed by lasers, there are dozens more under other canopies. For every sunken galleon mapped, 100 more are in the deep, holding their cargo of stories. The archaeologist's trowel, the satellite's eye, the diver's light. These are tools for listening, for tuning our ears to whispers. whispers that pass through stone and sediment for centuries. Who knows what metropolis sleeps under the sands of a desert we've already named? What port lies submerged under the silt of a familiar coast? The map of our past is still being drawn. Every new line makes the story richer, more complex. More human. The lost cities aren't lost forever. They're waiting for the next curious mind, the next beam of light, to ask the right question of the silent earth. And in that question, begin the conversation again.